Well, today we are concluding our series, "Oh Come, Let Us Adore Him," where each week we have a specific carol that we highlight and then back up with scripture text. And today was the first Noel. Now, we're going to be in Matthew 2, but the first Noel kind of, if you listen just to verse 1, it kind of gives you a head fake because it talks about Luke 2, the night Jesus was born. But Matthew 2, verses 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the first Noel actually go through the second chapter of Matthew. And so that's why we sing that today. We're going to tie everything up with a bow today and conclude our series with this. So Matthew, though, I want to take today a little bit differently than I have in the past when I've talked about Matthew 2. It's a common passage to go to right after Christmas, but today I want to approach it from a Jewish perspective. Because Matthew, when he wrote the Gospel of Matthew, his primary target was a Jewish audience. So what would they have heard? Well, Matthew included a lot of prophecies in his Gospel. He included a lot of prophecies in his Gospel. That is a primary way the Jewish people connected to the Messiah, and he knew that. They would have had Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and Tanakh, what we know as the Hebrew Old Testament. They would have seen and known all those prophecies, and so Matthew uses prophecies in chapter 2 when he tells the story of the birth of Jesus and the time surrounding that, and it connects and weaves the landscape together in a way that's unmistakable. Let me describe it this way. So in Israel, if you go to Israel, on the eastern border of Israel, there is something called the Kav Hatalim HaYisraeli. It's the Israel-Tel line. It is a line of cinder cone volcanoes. And you say, well, volcanoes, why do those stand out? Well, they stand out if you're standing on what's called the Golan, which is a wide, extensive plateau on the eastern border of Israel. So this wide, extensive, flat land, and dotted on it unmistakably are these cinder cone volcanoes. There's about 9 of them in the Kav Hatalim HaYisraeli. And they go from north to south. And by looking at them, you can go from one to the next, and you can tie the landscape together, and it's unmistakable. I believe that's what Matthew is doing in Matthew chapter 2. He's not just telling a narrative. He's weaving together, let's call them prophecy volcanoes. That's what we're going to call them today. But he's tying these prophecy volcanoes together. There are 4 of them in the text, and we'll take a look at them. And I believe that's what he's doing here to connect his readers, which also connect with us, that Jesus Christ's birth really did signify the coming of the Messiah. Now, go ahead and turn to Matthew 2 or pull up Matthew 2. Either way, but before you do that, I want to tell you a little side note while you're turning there. Something that Israel and Longview have in common. You ever thought about that? Something Israel and Longview have in common. So the middle word in that Israel-Tel line is tel, and that is word for hill, okay? That's the word for hill. And the largest coastal city in Israel, the second largest city in the country, is Tel Aviv. Well, Aviv is Hebrew for spring, so basically the largest coastal city in Israel is Spring Hill. So Longview and Israel both have a Spring Hill. And there you go. But it sounds a lot cooler to say Tel Aviv. But hopefully you're at Matthew 2 by now. All right, let's dig into the text. I love this story. This is a great story. We're going to take it 1, 2, 3 verses at a time. And hang on, buckle up. We got a lot to cover. Verse 1, Matthew 2. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem. Let's stop there for a second. Who were these Magi? Talk about them for just a minute. There's a lot of speculation from scholars who these guys were. Were they astronomers predicting starry phenomena for earthly significance? Were they astrologers? Who were these guys exactly? Well, the good news is we have a lot of coverage in history on detailing where these guys were and what they did. Now, they came primarily from what's now modern-day Iran and Iraq. And over the centuries, they had a lot of different roles, but they were always roles of significance. And over the centuries, by the time you get to the first century, when Jesus is born, the Magi, based near Babylon, these guys had a dual role in the government. So yeah, they had a priestly role, which was common for them over the centuries, but they also, the Magi had a secondary role as well. They were the upper house of the Parthian governing council. Would you like to know what one of their main jobs was? I'm glad. One of their main jobs was to choose and elect the king of the empire for Parthia. So these guys, these Magi that we see arriving in Jerusalem, were not just random individuals, random astronomers or astrologers, whatever they were. These guys were Parthian kingmakers. They selected kings. That's the Magi who showed up in Bethlehem or in Jerusalem that day. Everybody in town knew it, especially Herod. Let's look at verse 2. They asked, when they arrived in Jerusalem, these Magi, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When Herod heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. The other question is, looking at this text and this passage, is how did the Magi hear about the star? How did they know to be looking for the star? Where would they have gotten that idea? That's not something you just come up with on your own. And these Magi, being located kind of in Iran and Iraq, modern-day Iran and Iraq, near Babylon, Babylon just happens to be where the bulk of the exiles from Jerusalem and Judah were taken a few hundred years before that by Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon. So you have Jewish exiles, a lot of scholars who would have known all the Tanakh, all the Torah, all the prophecies. Now, if we could just somehow connect those Jewish scholars who knew the prophecies with the Magi in the same room, talking in the same place, that'd be phenomenal. And if we could do it in the pages of Scripture, be even better. And the good news is we absolutely can. There was a young man named Daniel. Daniel was one of the exiles, and he really excelled and grew in his position and his character there. One day, a dream came to Nebuchadnezzar, and he couldn't interpret it, this vision. None of the Magi could tell the king what the vision was and the interpretation, except for Daniel. God gave Daniel the vision and the interpretation of what it meant. So, when Daniel presented, only one in the entire realm who could do that, when he presented to Nebuchadnezzar the vision, this is what Nebuchadnezzar did for him in Daniel chapter 2, verse 46 through 49. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and paid humble respect to Daniel and gave orders to present him an offering and incense. The king responded to Daniel and said, "Your God truly is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, since you've been able to reveal this secret." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon. Here's the key: and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Made him head of the Magi in their headquarters. And Daniel made a request to the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon, while Daniel was at the king's court. So here you have a Jewish exile who became head of the Magi several hundred years ahead of the birth of Christ. So where did the Magi hear about it? Probably Daniel. He knew the prophecies. And it could have been a prophecy like Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, which said, I see him, but not now. I look at him, but not near. A star shall appear from Jacob, a scepter shall rise from Israel. That's really specific. But a star shall appear from Jacob, a scepter shall rise from Israel. Where would these Magi in the first century, right around the time of Jesus' birth, have gotten the idea? Probably, I don't know for sure, but very likely from Daniel passed down through the Magi. So whether they were watching for the star or God told them about it, either way, they arrive in Jerusalem, and Herod is in a panic. Some translations have different words they describe for being troubled, but greatly disturbed is how Herod was. Why would Herod have been greatly disturbed if somebody had been born king of the Jews? He wouldn't have been as greatly disturbed if he was a Jew by blood. But Herod was not. Herod's father was Edomian, meaning he came from the line of Esau. The promise, as we saw in Numbers 24, the promise comes through Jacob, not Esau. So Herod doesn't have a blood right to the throne based on that. Okay, so maybe his mom can help him out. Well, his mom's not much help because she's of Arabian descent. No Jewish blood. And so when the Magi come in asking the questions about who's been born king of the Jews, if a true blood-born king of the Jews is there, Herod's days are numbered. He doesn't have blood right to the throne. And look, I really believe the Parthian Magi knew exactly what they were saying when they said it the way they did. Because look, they had history. About 35 years before this event in Matthew 2, about 35 years before that, the Parthians had come in and sacked Jerusalem and Judea and conquered that region. Herod was a junior ruler at the time. The Parthians got the king and Herod's brother in that exchange. But Herod escaped, and then 3 years later, Herod came back with the full might of the Roman army at his back, and they retook Jerusalem and Judea. That's how Herod got installed as king. So these Parthian Magi had history. Maybe not them exactly, but them as a group would have had history with what happened in Jerusalem, and I think that's why they said it, exactly why they said it. Where is he who has been born king of the Jews, who has the legitimate right to the throne? Look, if they could destabilize the region by installing a Parthian-friendly king, they would love to have done that. I think that's exactly why they said it the way they said it. And then we see in verse 4, we have prophecy volcano number 1. There's going to be 4 that tie the landscape together. Number 1's in here, and it's going to be pretty obvious. And gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, well, in Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what was written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for from you will come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Okay, there's prophecy volcano number 1 from Micah 5:2. So why, if this threat is real, who does he ask? Well, it says here he asked the chief priests and scribes of the people. This would have been the Sanhedrin, the ruling council of all things legislative, religious. He asked them where the Messiah is supposed to be born. And it's really interesting to me. The Sanhedrin, when they convened, they got together and he asked them. They didn't call a special session. They didn't need to call a special meeting, convene a council, create a subcommittee. They didn't need to do any of that. Their reply was strikingly immediate. Someone's like, well, Bethlehem. Everybody knows that. It was immediate that they came out with Bethlehem as the place. And I think there's some irony here that the religious leaders of the day were a little more than a stone's throw away next door to where the Messiah had been born, and the Gentile Magi from the east were paying more attention to the coming Messiah than the Jewish religious leaders were. There's a little bit of irony there. All right, let's look at verse 7. Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and when you found him, report to me, so that I too may come and worship him." That's my greatest desire. I just want to worship. If there's a true king, I want to worship him. Look, Herod was cold and calculated. Herod did not ascend to the throne accidentally. Herod didn't keep the throne accidentally. Herod was a planner. It's kind of, hey, Magi, I'm kind of curious, when exactly did you first see that star? Just hypothetically, I'm interested. He was setting a timeline. Listen, Herod, if you look at history and read historians talking about him, he always had a plan A, B, C, D, E. I mean, he was very, very thorough. When did you see that star? So verse 9, after hearing the king, they, the Magi, went on their way, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went on ahead of them until it came to stop over the place where the child was to be found. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. So when they left Jerusalem, they had a little bit of a trek to make. Well, how far did they have to go? You know? Wasn't very far. It was literally 2 hills away, about 5 miles. I've been in Bethlehem at that site, and you look and there's a hill in the way from seeing Jerusalem, but if you clear that hill, you see Jerusalem. It's only a few minutes drive. It'd be kind of like going from here to Target, or if you don't like Target, going to Kohl's, okay, your preference. But it's like from here to Target or Kohl's north and going south, if you wanted to go south, it's like from here to Eastman. It's not that far from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. Wasn't that far at all. Now, what was the star? That's another question that comes up. What was that star exactly? A lot of people have written about this one. Was it a convergence of planets? Could have been. Was it a comet with a big tail? Could have been. Was it like a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night that led the people through the wilderness in the Exodus? Could have been. We don't know for sure. But we do know for sure that it was supernaturally given and presented and guided them in the rest of the way home. And Magi, when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Some translations have overjoyed. I like the more literal translation. They rejoiced with exceeding mega joy. They rejoiced with exceeding great joy. They were beside themselves with joy that they had found this, that they had probably been looking for as a group for hundreds of years. Verse 11. And after they came into the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And after being warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi left for their own country by another way. So where did they arrive? They arrived in a house. Didn't arrive in a feeding trough, didn't arrive at a manger, didn't arrive at a stable. They arrived at a house. Time had passed. Well, you say, well, how much time had passed? Why does that tell you, how does where they lived tell you how much time had passed? Where they lived doesn't necessarily tell me how much time had passed, but the word choice that Matthew uses for the baby or the child does matter and tell me that some time has passed. Matthew uses a word that's used for like toddler, small child. Luke, in Luke chapter 2, uses a word for infant, newborn baby. So this is no longer a newborn baby, this is a toddler, this is an infant. So that's how we know word usage is very important, and we can learn a lot from that. Well, how long has it been? I don't know. I mean, it could have been a few months to a year probably, because look, if you see the star, logistics takes time. So you got to see the star, you have to have enough Magi to see the star to get a consensus together, and then you have to convene together to have a meeting about what the star means, and then you have to decide on whether you're taking a trip. Once you decide to take the trip, you got to gather supplies, and so on and so on, and then you finally got to go, and then there's the travel time. This wouldn't have happened overnight. That's why I like in our nativity scene, there are no wise men around the nativity scene, because they weren't there that night. And don't change your home nativity scenes. That's fine. But I'm just saying, the Magi weren't there that night. They were off to the distance. That's how we know there had been some time that had passed. But look what they do when they get there. These probably mostly Gentile Magi, they worshiped. They bowed down and worshiped in reverence. And folks from ancient Iran and Iraq, when they worship, they would have bowed on their knees with their faces and foreheads to the ground. This is absolute, abject reverence to this child in front of them that they had been searching for so very long. And we see there are 3 intentional gifts. And this, by the way, the 3 intentional gifts is where we get the idea that there were 3 wise men, because somehow there's an unwritten rule that only 1 gift per wise man, no exceptions. We don't know how many wise men there were, but that's why they think there were 3, is because there were 3 gifts, but we don't know for sure. But there were for sure 3 gifts. Let's talk about them a little bit. The gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The gold is easiest to explain because gold was incredibly valuable, and it was often used to pay tribute from kingdom to kingdom. So tribute for a king, gold makes sense. Frankincense or incense makes sense as well. That was used in the religious worship. And for Jesus, this child, they are worshiping the King of Kings, and so frankincense makes sense as well. But what doesn't make sense in the 3 gifts is the myrrh. And honestly, I would love to know what Mary and Joseph were thinking when they first caught sight of the myrrh coming out of the package, coming out of the sack. Well, hey, myrrh is used as a burial spice to prepare dead people for entombment. Why are you giving that to my son? I would love to know what they were thinking when they saw that. But it would be a fitting gift because he would die for the sins of humanity later on down the road, then rise in victory over death. But those were the 3 gifts. And by the way, they weren't just super symbolic. They're also very valuable financially. They would have been worth a tremendous amount of money. So then let's go into verse 13 where we're going to have prophecy volcano number 2. Now when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and stay there until I tell you, for Herod's going to search for the child to kill him." So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night and left for Egypt. He stayed there until the death of Herod. This happened so that what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet would be fulfilled. Out of Egypt I called my son, Hosea 11:1. prophecy volcano number 2, tying this landscape together. I love this we see about Joseph. There's no time to waste. Herod, once he realizes he's been tricked, Herod's the trickster. He's not used to being played, but he just got had, and he's going to be hopping mad. Now, Joseph, look what he does. When the text says that he had the angel of the Lord appear to him, get up, take the child, and go. Verse 14, while it was still night, he took Jesus and Mary. Every time you see Joseph in Scripture, don't see many examples of him, but every time you do, he acts with honor and love and obedience and faithfulness. An amazing earthly father to raise the Son of God. I love that about Joseph. I tell you, I wish we knew more about him on this side of heaven, but we don't yet. But he's an amazing individual. He just acts immediately. I love that. It's a good example. All right, so they're going to move to Egypt, which is where they are told to go. We see that in 15 from Hosea 11:1. But they're going to move to Egypt. How are they going to support themselves? There are Jewish communities in Egypt, by the way, back in that day, especially near Cairo, near the pyramids. There were Jewish settlements down there. But to our knowledge, there was no family. Joseph and Mary didn't have any family down there. So how to support a family, young family of 3? They had just been given a king's ransom. Literally. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They weren't just super symbolic, they were super spendable. So they had absolutely the means to survive and live down in Egypt until the time was for them to go back. So how did Herod react? The wise men have escaped. They've gone home by another way. Verse 12. The young king has escaped. We saw that Joseph just took him in the passage we read. So based on what you know of Herod so far, how do you think he's going to react? Spoiler alert, not well. All right? Look at verse 16. Then when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged and sent men and killed all the boys who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity who were 2 years old or under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi. Remember, that's that question he asked them. Then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. Here's prophecy volcano number 3. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. Herod, the master deceiver and manipulator, had just gotten played. Plan A was to find out where the Messiah was from the Magi and then just slaughter him and his family. That was plan A. Now, plan B takes effect. And it's a horrible plan. But he's a horrible human being. And in this plan, he was given instructions to the death squads, basically, to go and wipe out all the babies, boys, 2 years and under. There's a great American archaeologist from the 20th century named William Albright, great scholar. He said that based on this time in the first century, Bethlehem probably would have had around 300 people living in it. There would have been about 6 or 7 boys 2 years old and under that would have been killed in this slaughter. Well, why do I tell you the size? I tell you the size because a town of 300 people with so few boys of that range, it would have been nearly impossible to hide Jesus from the prying eyes of the death squads. That's why they had to get out of there so quickly. And I love it. Joseph immediately got them out of there. Now, why 2 years old? I think it was the time of the star plus some. Look, Herod covered his bases. He was not a guy to leave anything to chance. So it's probably, I think, probably is about a year since the time Jesus had been born. But Herod, would never take chances. And so he wanted to make sure that he covered the margin and the window of opportunity as best as possible. So he probably went up on the timeline. He didn't care. He said, well, how could Herod do something like that? What kind of a person was he? He was a guy who killed some of his own sons to stay on the throne. So somebody else's kids, he didn't care. He would even kill his own kids to stay enthroned. Again, he was a horrific person. Look at verse 19. But when Herod died, this is probably a couple years later, but when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up and take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. So you fast forward 2 years, Herod is dead, the green light has been given. The people who wanted Jesus dead are now dead. Joseph, again, love it, acts with honor, obedience, faithfulness, love. Great example. But, verse 22, but when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Then after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the regions of Galilee. So Joseph takes Mary and Jesus, they cross the border, they get into Judea in Israel, and once they're there, they realize, yes, Herod's dead, but Archelaus is on the throne. Archelaus is one of Herod's sons, and Archelaus was just like his dad. Horrible human being, brutal ruler. So God told him, go up to the Galilee. Go up to Galilee. Up there was reigning Herod Antipas, one of Herod's other sons. Now, Herod was a very undisciplined, Herod Antipas was a very undisciplined individual, but he was a capable ruler. And look, honestly, in leadership, you know you're not a very good leader when the best historians can say is, at least he wasn't as bad as his brother. And that's what they say about Herod Antipas. Archelaus was horrible, Herod Antipas was tolerable. So God sent Joseph, Mary, and Jesus up to the Galilee. Verse 23, last verse we'll look at from Matthew 2. And they came, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, they came and settled in a city called Nazareth. This happened so that what was spoken through the prophets would be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. There's prophecy volcano number 4. Now, this is one of the more interesting prophecy volcanoes because we don't have a specific text from the Tanakh or Torah tied back into this, so that he would be called a Nazarene. Where is that from? What fulfillment is that? It could be a reference to Isaiah 11:1, because in that Isaiah 11:1, the netzer, the shoot or branch that comes from the stump of Jesse, maybe that's why he's called a Nazarene. But a lot of scholars also believe that it's quite possible that this is just a reference to the despised and scorned character of the coming Messiah. Because to call someone a Nazarene, not a compliment, for a variety of reasons. I mean, even over the centuries, even into Jesus' day, one of his own disciples, Nathanael, when Philip, you can find this in John 1, specifically John 1:46, but when Philip went to go tell Nathanael, hey, I found the Messiah, guess what? He's from Nazareth, and he's amazing, he's the Messiah, you gotta come meet him. Nathanael, whoa. Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? Even in the first century, that he would be a Nazarene was not a compliment. I mean, this is quite a chapter, honestly. You got prophecy volcanoes, 4 of them through the whole chapter, Magi, kings, deception, faithfulness, provision. This is the Messiah's first coming. And it's a great story that we love to tell every year, and we need to tell it every year. But that's the first coming. There's another prophecy in Isaiah I want to look at regarding what is believed to be Jesus' second coming. First advent, Matthew 2. Second advent, his coming again one day, from Isaiah chapter 60, verse 6. In the end times, people will come from far and wide to see the Messiah, and they'll also bring a lot of gifts. Isaiah 60, verse 6 says, "A multitude of camels will cover you. The young camels of Midian and Ephah, all those from Sheba will come. They will bring gold and frankincense and proclaim good news of the praises of the Lord." Yeah, just like the Magi coming, they bring gifts, but look at the list there. They bring gold and frankincense. They're missing one. Which one are they missing? They're missing the myrrh. Why don't they bring the Messiah myrrh on his second coming? Because he won't be dying again. Jesus died once for all time for the sins of humanity, to save humanity from their sins, and he will not be dying again. But he will come back in glory. So there's no need to bring myrrh anymore. But the gold and frankincense we lay at his feet. That is the message of hope. That is the message of Christmas. And that is the message for us today. Let's pray.